The Prime Minister has defended his actions after he was blasted with accusations of being part of a Southport cover-up, while he admitted knowing details of the attack. His statement has followed his earlier admission that the British state failed the 3 girls who had been brutally murdered by Axel Rudakubana at a Taylor Swift dance class last summer. Starmer said that Southport must be a line in the sand, although nothing will be off the table in this inquiry, insisting that it will lead to change. Keir Starmer is pathetically trying to claim that revealing Axel Rudakubana's links to terrorism would have caused the case to fall apart. Keir Starmer knew at this very moment. Then he blamed everything on the far right. In today's video, we will watch and react to the media's questions as they grill him over it. But first, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and join our fast-growing community. Just a quick one to say we do have new One Keir t-shirts available on our website. Go to britishstand.com or check the link in the description. Let's have a watch of this.
Sky News, thank you. Prime Minister, it now emerges the perpetrator was known to the authorities and had been referred to prevent the anti-terrorism programme 3 times. He'd had contact with the police, the courts, the justice, the youth system and mental health services. It's a catastrophic failure of the state to protect those young girls. Do you acknowledge that if that information had come out when the riots were happening, it would have provoked further outrage by the public, so you withheld information? Is that true? And do you acknowledge that whatever happens now, whatever public inquiry you carry out, this will hugely undermine trust from the public in the authorities and your government? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Let me be clear. Responsibility for the disorder and the violence lies with those that perpetrated it. We need to be really clear about that. But let me address the facts as you put them to me. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse. I'm never going to do that. Never going to do that, because they deserve that justice. And only by having the rules in place can that justice be delivered, as a measure of it now has. And I wouldn't be forgiven if I had. Those are not just my choices, though it is a choice I would make. It is also the law of the land. That is why I couldn't disclose the details. It's why others couldn't disclose the details. It's why all of you as journalists couldn't disclose the details, because the same laws applied to you just as they applied to me. And it's really important that we make that clear. But the purpose of the rule is to protect the justice that the families and the victims are entitled to. I think that's the right thing. It is now right, having got to this stage, that the questions are asked and the answers are given, which is why we've taken the course of an inquiry, but also why between now and the conclusion of the inquiry, we will happily answer any questions that are put to us. But that is why, notwithstanding that, yes, I was being kept updated, of course, I did not disclose anything that would collapse the trial and defeat justice in this case. And I don't think anybody could ever have looked the victims and their families in the eye if they'd ever done that. Thank you, Beth. Can I have Paul Brand, please, from ITV?
Paul Brand from ITV. Thank you, Prime Minister. All of us, as you say, as journalists, understand the risk of contempt of court, of prejudicing a trial, but we live in a different age now, don't we, where misinformation and disinformation spreads at lightning speed online. I was in Southport on the day of the attacks. There was a short window in which information could have been released before charge, before any risk of prejudicing a trial. Why didn't you do that? And do you think it was a mistake not to provide that detail then?
Firstly, let me address part of your... Look, it is true that we live in a different age in that information is now available online as well as offline. And I understand the frustration of all, but including some journalists who observe the rules and don't report what they know because they know that the law doesn't permit it and it runs the risk of collapsing a trial, only to see information online that doesn't appear to be following the same rules. And that is not acceptable. That has to be addressed and will be part of what we will be looking at, because that can't be right. But in relation to the central thrust of your question, the importance of the rule about not disclosing this information is to ensure that the trial can take place and that where an individual is guilty, they're held to account, as has now happened in this case. And that is why the law carefully restricts what can be said by anyone, not just me as Prime Minister, but anybody in these circumstances. And it is done to protect the family and their victims. That is the right thing, and that is what the law requires. It's also the choice I would make to ensure that my first thoughts are about justice for the victims and their families. That, for me, is first and foremost. Yes, we can answer questions, and we are now doing so with this inquiry, and everything that will happen before the end of that inquiry. That is quite right. But it is also right that the families who've been through unimaginable grief at least have the comfort now of an outcome in this particular case. And you would be putting very different questions to me if I had disclosed information and we were now faced with a decision that the trial had just collapsed and the families would never get justice. You would rightly be challenging me very, very hard about why I had disclosed information. Thank you very much, Paul. Chris from GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News. Prime Minister, given what we know now about the terror link and how it's kept from the public, do you now regret blaming the far right for all those protests last summer? Was it a far right issue, or were some people entitled to be concerned and upset, not the rioters, of course?
Responsibility for the violence lies with them that perpetrated it. I was in Southport the day after these terrible murders. I was acknowledging and thanking the frontline police officers and ambulance who had been at the scene. You can imagine what they had been through. They were back at work the next day. They were saying it was just their job. I could see in their eyes the impact it had had on them, what they had to deal with, what they had to see, how they endured that. As I arrived back in London, those same officers were putting their riot gear on and having bricks thrown at them. Those same officers. I don't think anybody can justify that, nor should they attempt to do so. Thank you, Chris. Harry from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Sorry to labour this point, but I think it's important. All summer we were repeatedly told that the Stockport attack was not terror-related, it wasn't being treated as terror-related. That wasn't true. Because in October, this monster was charged with a terror offence. Now, information was put into the public domain then that didn't collapse the trial. It didn't jeopardise justice. It was just months later. Now, you say you knew about the ricin and the Al-Qaeda bomb manual and it was known to the authorities. Did you know about that personally at the same time the public, the press, and you and the police were saying this is not terror-related? Because I think that's the nub of the issue and that's what's upset people. You say you couldn't speak out publicly, that you couldn't do that, but didn't the public have a right to know, not least the neighbours who had ricin being produced on their street? Surely they had a right to know.
Well, I think there are two separate and important issues there, Harry. The first is on the question of terrorism and what constitutes terrorism. And my concern in this case is that we have clearly got an example of extreme violence, individualised violence, that we have to protect our children from and our citizens from. And it is a new threat. It's not what we would have usually thought of as terrorism when definitions were drawn up, when guidelines were put in place, when the framework was put in place. And we have to recognise that here today, because I think most people would say, looking at the facts of this case, it's clearly extreme violence, it's clearly intended to terrorise. And I completely accept and understand that, and that is my view. Therefore, we have to make sure that the law and the framework for responding is appropriate to the new threat that we face. And there we will make whatever changes are necessary in the law to deal with it. On the second point, yes, of course I was kept up to date with the facts as they were emerging. That is usual practice. But just like you, as a journalist, I had to observe the law of the land. It was not my personal decision to withhold this information, any more than it was a journalist's personal decision not to print or write about it. That is the law of the land that is in place for the reasons I've set out, to protect the integrity of the system, to ensure that the victims and their families get the justice that they deserve. Thank you, Harry. And Jason from the Mail.
Thanks, PM. Jason Gross from the Daily Mail. It sounds from what you're saying like you personally consider this to have been a terrorist attack in the ordinary sense of the word. Is that right? And also, it sounds like you don't think that this is a one-off. Should people be worried? And are we going to need further protections in schools, youth centres? Because this guy seems to have had some sort of obsession with school massacres.
Well, thank you for raising that, because I think this is a really central issue, because, as I say, this is extreme violence, clearly intended to terrorise, and my concern is that because it is different to the sort of behaviour we've associated with terrorism, Al-Qaeda, or there are plenty of other examples, which tended to be more organised in groups with a clear political ideology and motive, because it's not that, it is a new and different threat, it doesn't fit as well as it should within our framework, within our toolbox. And that is what we've got to change. That is the urgent question that has to be addressed. And it's one that has to be addressed before the conclusion of the inquiry. And it's why we've already done the learning from the prevent mistakes. But it is that cohort. I do think it's new. You've seen versions of it in America with some of the mass shootings in schools. It is not an isolated, ghastly example. It is, in my view, an example of a different kind of threat. And that is why I'm absolutely so determined that we will rise to that challenge and make sure that our law, our response, is capable, appropriate, and can deal with that sort of threat. But that is my concern, that is my thinking, that this is a new threat, individualised, extreme violence, obsessive, often following online viewing of material from all sorts of different sources. It is not a one-off, it is something that we all need to understand and have a shared undertaking to deal with within our society. And that is not just the laws on terrorism, the framework on terrorism, it's also the laws on what we can access online. We still have rules in place in this country about what you can see at a cinema. And yet online, you can access no end of material. We have to ensure that we can rise to this new challenge, and that is what I'm determined to do. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
In other news, Reform UK MP Richard Tice has slammed the announcement of a public inquiry into the Southport murders, claiming, "We're facing the mother of all cover-ups." Speaking to the media, Tice expressed scepticism about the investigation into how triple child killer Axel Rudakubana was able to carry out his attack despite previous contact with authorities. "There's an extraordinary list of questions and coincidences. People want answers," said Tice, responding to the Home Secretary's announcement of the inquiry. Rudakubana, 18, pleaded guilty yesterday at Liverpool Crown Court to murdering 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport. Alice de Silva Aguiar, 9, Baby King, 6, and Elsie Stankham, 7, died in the attack at the Hart Space on July 29th. He also admitted the attempted murder of 8 other children and 2 adults, as well as the production of ricin and possession of an Al-Qaeda training document. The court heard Rudakubana had been referred to counter-terrorism police specialists 3 times between December 2019 and April 2021, when he was aged 13 and 14. Lancashire Child Safeguarding Partnership revealed he had received ongoing support after experiencing increased anxiety and social isolation. He was excluded from Range High School in Formby after telling Childline he was bringing a knife to school, and later assaulted someone with a hockey stick when he returned to the premises. Multiple agencies, including police, social services, and mental health services, had contact with Rudakubana before the attack. It is inconceivable that they did not know within a couple of hours that this guy was a proper wrong 'un, Tice added. The Reform UK MP criticised the timing of the inquiry announcement, suggesting it was being used to kick the can down the road. "We can have an inquiry now, but we can't have one for the child rape gangs because it doesn't suit the Labour Party," he said. Once again, it feels like one rule for them, and forget the rest of the British public. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced the public inquiry will investigate how Ruda Cubana came to be so dangerous, and why the PREVENT programme failed to identify the terrible risk he posed. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said there were grave questions to answer about how the state failed the victims. The inquiry will have statutory powers to summon witnesses to give evidence under oath and compel the production of documents. The Home Office has also commissioned an urgent PREVENT learning review into the 3 referrals that were closed. What are your thoughts on what we discussed in today's video? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you've not yet already, make sure you do drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more British content. Thank you, take care, goodbye.